you're confronted with ideas or assumptions that you've had for most part of your life. So so when these things happen and you experience them, don't feel bad. Actually, it's a sign of growth and a sign you have to grapple and process and figure your way forward. So at some level, it's like a blessing to be able to hear all these scholars and to be challenged, and hopefully it creates self-awareness and reinvigorates you to fight for just basic human decency. So I know it's challenging, but I think this is what learning is all about, and to learn is really, it's a blessing. So on that note, one of the the mentors of ISGAP, David, who you heard last week. So David, thanks for your patience this morning.
No problem.
And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. And I do want to say thank you to everyone. I'll be leaving early tomorrow morning, and I'm grateful for all the learning that I've received from everyone here. I'm grateful for the exemplary person, the example that Charles sets for dedication, rigor, tirelessness. I'm especially grateful to El Shaddai, without whom none of this would happen. So, one of the characters in Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky's novel, named Marmeladov, he's the father of Sonia, if you know the novel. He says at one point, do you know what it means to have no place to go? To have no home to go to. Homelessness. In the last few days, it's hit me. One of the things I've learned, I think, is that in our time, anti-Zionism is not just one of many manifestations of anti-Semitism, it's the quintessential manifestation. Okay. Anti-Zionism is about the elimination of a place to go for the Jews. It's not about government policies. It's about the existence of a place to go for the Jewish people. The human history, the life of the human soul individually, as a community, as a culture, society, is about, one way to think of what it's about exile and dwelling. Okay. The Exodus from Egypt, the story of Odysseus. It's the return home. There lies our humanity in the movement of return home. What makes a home a dwelling place? We have many teachings in Jewish tradition. For example, it's a table in the home. We're taught that since the destruction of the temple, the table in the home where you invite those who need a table to eat, to sit. It takes the place of the altar. Okay? This is where God can dwell. God, who is known as Hamakom, the place. The code of Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch, says that in a land where people are buried in coffins, your coffin should be made of the wood of the table where you invited guests, where you invited the widow, the orphan, the beggar, the stranger. This is what anti-Semitism is about, it seems to me, what anti-Zionism is about. The Jew, we like the wandering Jew, right? Not the dwelling Jew. It goes to our humanity, and it goes to how we understand education. Stay with me. Universities, colleges, higher education, this has come up daily. Now, I like movies. More and more, when I refer to a movie in class, my students look at me, what's that? Never heard of it. Can you believe they've never heard of Humphrey Bogart? There's a movie called The Book Thief, based on the novel by Marcus Zusak. In the movie, not in the novel, but in the movie, there's a scene where it's about a little girl in Nazi Germany whose mother is arrested for being a communist. She's taken in by foster parents. She becomes very close to the foster parents. She's out with her father one day, and they see Gestapo hauling off a shopkeeper for being, a Jew. Her father says something, I know this man, he's a good man. The Gestapo, they throw him to the ground. Of course, Liesel is like 8 or 9, is horrified. They go home. She goes down into the basement where they have a young Jew named Max hiding in the basement. Hiding. In Nazi Europe, every Jew was homeless, in hiding, in a camp, in a ghetto, in a Judenhaus, trying to pass. Every Jew was homeless. So she goes down to Max and tells him, they threw my father down. They hate my father. They hate the Jews. Why do they hate us? Why do they hate my father, the Jews? And Max says, because we remind them of their humanity. Now, what are we reminded of when we're reminded of our humanity, and why would we hate somebody for reminding us? I think when we're reminded of our humanity, we're reminded of an infinite responsibility that we have to and for the other child of God, the other whole manifestation of holiness. We're presented with a ledger that we can never pay off because the debt increases in the measure that it's paid. We're robbed of our sleep. And we will kill people who rob us of our sleep. We're reminded that we're asked, what Cain was asked, where's your brother and what have you done? We hate the question. That's the Jewish question that we want to resolve and get rid of. Where is your brother and what have you done? We hate the question, we hate being asked, and we hate the one who's asking. Okay. Our capacity to say, how do we say where our fellow human being is through what we have done. It's that relationship that makes dwelling in the world possible. And this brings me to a text written by a man who was not at home. Perhaps you've heard of Kalonymus Shapira, the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto. He's the author. Probably his most famous sefer, holy book, is Esh Kodesh, Holy Fire. It's in English translation as Sacred Fire. It's a Torah commentary / diary that he kept from September 1939 to July 1942. It's a remarkable document. In a book called A Student's Obligation, he discusses education. What is education? Chinuch. And Rabbi Shapira explains chinuch pertains to the education of a child, of a person, that takes place in a Beit Sefer, school. A Beit Sefer is house of the book or home of the book, the dwelling place of the book. It's a word that also pertains to the dedication of a place of worship, like Hanukkah. Chinuch is the root of Hanukkah, the rededication of the temple, right? The place of worship we call a Beit Knesset, house, home, dwelling place of gathering together as a community to affirm our higher relation and our human relation. And it pertains, says Rabbi Shapira, to the sanctifying the home where you live, where you put up mezuzahs. You make your home into a sanctuary, it's sanctifying the home, a bait. The Temple Mount, Har HaBait, the mount of the home, the dwelling place. So everyone here has some connection with education, the enterprise of learning, teaching, studying. So what I'm about to discuss, intersectionality in the academy, implicates all of us sitting here. There is no engaging this topic innocently. The term intersectionality has been is used in various senses, various ways. Some situate it in academic discourse in the 1970s with issues surrounding black feminism. Others, Anna Karastasis claims that it was Kimberly Crenshaw who introduced the term in 1989. Mostly for my purposes, I'm going to use what Kevin Levin describes as intersectionality. He's a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He says intersectionality is the shared victimhood of groups victimized by white male racism and its history of imperialism, colonialism, exploitation, and slavery. Among the prominent anti-Semitic intersectionality allies in academia are ethnic activists, LGBTQ activists, feminists, and others on the political far left. Extending beyond academia is a certain intersectionality with white supremacists. This is my addition to his remark. Neo-Nazis, jihadists, and others whose Jew hatred is legitimized by the guardians of higher learning. Now, just a couple of brief examples of intersectionality in the academy. You may remember last fall this move by the UC Berkeley's law students for justice in Palestine determined that they would ban Zionists from coming to the campus to speak, and there were at least 9 other organizations signed on. Here's some examples. Women of Berkeley Law, Asian Pacific American law students, Middle Eastern and North African law, law students of African descent, the Queer Caucus. Now notice, this isn't a law school. Law schools are critical to this, the way we think about law and human standing, human position. How we understand the value, the dearness of a human being is directly tied to how we understand what law is. I touched on this last time, as you may recall. There's also recently the example of Fatima Muhammad at CUNY Law School commencement speech, where she denounced Israel for raining bullets and bombs on worshipers, murdering the old and the young, encouraging lynch mobs to target Palestinians, and so on, to a standing ovation. Okay, now, in our society, in the Western world, and I would say in the higher endeavors of higher learning, the process of modern thinking has been a process of thinking God out of the picture, certainly in philosophy, until Nietzsche pronounces God dead. God is irrelevant. Nietzsche, who died in 1900. And this, I talked last time a little bit about the turn inward. So a shift where the thinking self, the thinking ego becomes the ground of being, or the feeling ego, or the resolved ego, the will to power becomes the ground of legitimacy. And you got to think God out of the picture to get there. So where then lies the holiness? Is there such a thing as holiness? So I think there's one among the intersections, another kind of intersections, the question of the human being and what the anti-Zionist is anti. What is the anti-Zionist anti anyway? You might say, well, the anti-Zionist is opposed to the existence of the Jewish state. Okay, but why? Um, Not long after the October War in 1973, Andre Neher, if you know this Jewish thinker, made the following statement. He says, Zion, which is only a fragment of Jerusalem and the land of Israel, is a word one can neither play around with nor play tricks with, nor beat around the bush with. It is the key word of the meta of Jewish history. Through Zion, Zionism becomes bidimensional. The vertical is interlocked with the horizontal. Think of Ben Adam LaMakom, Ben Adam LaChavro. The relation between the human and God, the vertical, and human, horizontal. God gave Moses 2 tablets, not because he couldn't write small enough to get it on one, but to articulate 2 realms of relation, higher relation and human relation. Okay? Each needing the other to have meaning. Neher sees in Zion this interlocking of a higher relation and human relation. It's not, for Andre Neher, it's not reducible to social political struggle. Okay, so let's not leave Zion out of Zionism. You may or may not buy this, Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, that the Torah goes forth from Zion. It doesn't matter whether we buy it or not. It's part of the history of our thinking. Right? Now, when we get rid of the Torah that goes forth from Zion and the word of Hashem that goes forth from Jerusalem, when we eliminate that, then we're left with what I call ontological accidents to become first principles. What does that mean? Things like race, class, ethnos become the foundation of meaning, value, holiness, sanctity. Okay? So you have characters like de Gobineau saying that the racial problem overshadows all other problems of history. De Gobineau is one of the 19th century race theorists. The race problem is the problem. Okay. This is not the same as, I mean, the dangerous intersectionality is that it says same as, Israelis are same as Nazis. If it's same as, then you don't have to analyze anything. You don't have to compare and contrast. Critical race theory is a theory with race at the center. It's supposed, these are some features according to the writings of the critical race theorists that I've read, the features of critical race theory. Race functions for CRT as class does for Marxism. There is a Marxist influence, but with a difference. The difference is, at least in principle, the Marxist wants to eliminate the class distinction, right? Ultimately, it's the classless society. The critical race theorist wants to maintain the racial distinction. So race is the first principle. Race is what shapes social interaction, political power, narrative. Okay, many of the critical race theorists come from law schools. The importance of narrative is emphasized. That truth is determined by ego-centered, maybe not so much ego-centered, but certainly group-centered narrative. And let's say, remember Descartes and Kant. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Kant's idea of the free individual is the one who is self-legislating. Okay. Races are separated by unbridgeable gaps. White privilege is a synonym for evil, and all Jews are white. Now, among the critical race theorists, well, I mentioned Kimberly Crenshaw. She's very prominent. She maintains, and this is in a collection of writings called Critical Race Theory, the Key Writings. She's one of the editors that racial political power determines human value. Power determines human value. Power is the only reality and weakness is the only sin in this thinking. It's not the holiness of the human created in the divine image. That's just something used to manipulate people and suppress them. There's no physical or metaphysical tie between one human being and every other human being as taught in Jewish tradition. And I mentioned this last time. We all start with one. There is this, among many of the critical race theorists like Gary Peller, there is this separatist thinking. Peller admires Stokely Carmichael, segregationist, Black Panther, and anti-Semite, right? Carmichael famously said, and I have no use for white people, but the greatest of them to my mind was Hitler. One of the, John McWhorter calls Ibram X. Kendi one of the high priests of wokeism. I can recommend David Bernstein's Woke Antisemitism. It's an excellent study, must reading. He mentions Kendi. But this, now note this kind of this inverted thinking. And we've seen examples of inversion and and twisting of thinking. In his book, this is how to be an anti-racist, okay? The most threatening racist movement is not the alt-right's unlikely drive for a white ethno-state. No. The most threatening racist movement is the regular Americans' drive for a race-neutral country, a colorblind society. The real racist, in other words, denies the essentialism of race as a first principle. The real racist would pull race out of the central place that it has in determining truth, sanctity, and so on. It's not that we want to ignore race. Race is a reality, right? The question is, where is it situated in our understanding of reality? So, if you read anti-Zionist tracts, you'll see statements like Judaism is Zionism, Zionism is Judaism. The Charter of Hamas makes such statements, and of course, Zionism is racism. As Isabella beautifully and profoundly demonstrated for us. According to my reading, according to Wistridge, Yaakov Malik, UN ambassador, had a lot to do with pushing this. According to Wistridge. So to be an anti-racist, how to be an anti-racist? You be an anti-Zionist. Because Zionism is the same as racism. A position made official with Resolution 3379, which was a year earlier preceded by Resolution 3236, which made the PLO an official representative of the Palestinians. There is a connection, right? PLO, anti-Zionist, and if you want to tag Zionism with the worst possible sin, it's racism, right? So Wistridge points out that by 1982, the Soviet campaign against the Jews had already eroded the already flimsy distinctions between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and I think in the presentations we've seen that distinction has been eroded as well. Now, in the academy, the halls of higher learning, As to what makes it higher, what we should perhaps discuss and think about. But these are some of the academic professional organizations that denounced Israel in various ways. Some of them have adopted BDS. You know about the American Anthropological Association, but they're not the only ones. Association of Chicana and Chicano Studies, Native American Studies. What has this to do with Israel? It has to do with a kind of self-righteous interest in being perceived as a group with moral integrity. And you can have no moral integrity unless you oppose the existence of the Jewish state. It's not a political issue. It's a moral issue. Okay? Notice the bottom 100 in 2021, in response to Israel's response to Hamas. I mean, you remember some of the excellent points Seema made. More than 130 women's studies, gender studies programs and universities, as programs, not individuals, signed a statement in support of Hamas, saying that the Palestinian cause is the same as intersection, the feminist cause. And you say, well, how can they be the same? They are the same because they both oppose the evil that is the Jewish state. So where does it lead? There's no safe space for Jews. Seema talked beautifully about being safe. In January, this is a report from Naftali Bennett. This is like 6 months after another engagement with Gaza. 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents on campuses. Not just from other students, but also from the professors. The professors are part of the problem. Other examples. This is one, Barry Kosman, I think, has done presentations here for us. More than half of Jewish students have experienced anti-Semitism. This is from 2015. 2020, a poll by the Brandeis Center, 65% of Jewish college students feel unsafe as Jews. They're afraid to openly wear things, kippah, Star of David, that would identify them as Jews. They're afraid. You understand? They're afraid. They don't have a place. They have to hide, like Max, hiding in the cellar. Not just like Max, but that is the anti-Zionism that would deny the Jews a place in a homeland denies the Jews a place on the campus. Tammy Rossman Benjamin, some of you know her. I think one of you may have been one of her students. No? Yeah. She's great, excellent. She has run this gauntlet herself, personally. It does wonderful studies. She has studies showing that she looks at course syllabi. She does interviews. Data. She's very active and with the legislature in California. So she's on the ground, not just in the theories. But who are some of the professors? You've heard of Edward Said. These are well-known professors. You see there's several from Columbia. The Center for Middle East Studies at Columbia is notorious, but they're not the only one. Joseph Massad, for example, said Israel has perpetrated racist colonial violence for the last century against the Palestinian people. Racist colonial is kind of redundant. If it's colonial, it's racist. If it's racist, it's colonial. But notice these, and if it's Israel, it's evil. If it's Israel, then it's colonial. We heard a wonderful testimony about Mrs. Harris, who fled from Libya, and this is in the context of about 850,000 plus Jews fleeing from Arab lands. Are they colonialists? Are the Ethiopian Jews colonialists? Are the Mizrahi Jews colonialists? Soviet Jews? It happens that when people flee from danger in the Middle East, Far East, Soviet Union, Africa, South America, they're refugees. When Jews flee, they're colonialists. Gil Andijar, Israel is absolutely a colonial enterprise, colonial. Mark Ellis, Jewish guy, directed the Jewish Studies program at Baylor. He says Palestinians are the same as the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, awaiting annihilation. Here's some others. Names that some are probably perhaps familiar to you, others not so familiar. In 2020, you remember when the Israelis were discussing extending civil authority to certain areas in the West Bank where Jews live, rather than military authority? Oh, Israel's going to annex the West Bank. People went ballistic, including more than 400 Jewish scholars, so-called, who signed a statement, not just, this is a big mistake, we think this is a wrong-headed policy, don't do it. No. They used the language of condemning Israel as an apartheid state, guilty of crimes against humanity. And I know many of them who signed this. And here are some of them. These are famous ones. Steve Zipperstein, Susanna Heschel, and one of the things, what do we do? I say name them, call out the names. So what is happening here with this language of apartheid state, colonial state, just like the Warsaw Ghetto, guilty of crimes against humanity? This is not an argument. This is an incitement. We've talked about propaganda. In Mein Kampf, Hitler discusses propaganda, if you can stand reading that book, at some length. In fact, Hassan al-Banna, founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, said what he knew about propaganda he got from Hitler. The purpose of propaganda, says Hitler, is certainly not to inform. It's not even to persuade exactly. It's to incite what Hitler called Zorniges Hass, wrathful hatred. It's to incite. As Wistrich points out, that this language, it incites a Jew hatred that delegitimizes and dehumanizes Israel. Dehumanizes. They're not human. You can't murder someone and behold the humanity of someone in the same instant. The face forbids us to kill, as Levinas says. And it's totalitarian in its political essence and theological in its insistence that Israel was born in sin. Born in sin. This is a kind of metaphysical dimension introduced to this Jew hatred. Of course, the only redemption is annihilation. Burning at the stake. They can't be rehabilitated. As Jean-Francois Lyotard says, that the Jews are the irremissible in history, beyond remission. There's no remission of the sin for being Jewish. In the Middle Ages, says Lyotard, you try to convert them, they're stiff-necked. In the modern time, you try to have them assimilate, they don't quite fit in. in the 20th century, you exterminate them. Now, what about the students? It was pointed out, Sima pointed out, Students for Justice in Palestine is not exactly a student organization, but they do a lot of student recruiting. Hatem Bazian is not a student, but he's a founder of SJP 2001. Here's some images of SJP. Everything about Israel is illegal. Nothing they have done, but everything they are. They have no place in human society, in human company, among the human nations. You know, in 2017, there were 3 times more condemnations of Israel from the UN than the other 192 countries put together. Are they that bad? There's some bad players among the other 192. Everything is illegal. Isabella put this image up. This, as you can see, the SJP didn't invent this equation. Jews are the same as Nazis, intersection. Israel is the same as apartheid, South Africa. What is morally required when we encounter an apartheid state? It has to be dismantled, doesn't it? And I don't have to explain to anyone here that Israel, in fact, is not an apartheid state. These are some groups endorsed by SJP. Charles headed up a pretty extensive research project. Others, including myself, helped him a little bit with it on the National Students for Justice in Palestine. It's like 90 pages or so. If you do NSJP search on the ISGAP site, it'll come up. These are some of the, of course, SJP and BDS are tied at the hip, and they're supporters of terrorist groups. For example, the organization, the PNIF, created by Yasser Arafat and Marwan Barghouti in the year 2000. Arafat, you know, does he need introduction? Head of the PLO, founder of Fatah. Marwan Barghouti was one of the chief leaders of the 2 intifadas, arrested in 2002, currently serving 5 life sentences. And these are the, in the PNIF, these are 5 officially designated terrorist organizations. If you can tie it to the terror, then maybe you can get something done with the money, right? If you're following the money. We've already mentioned BDS. I have had an experience of a prospective job candidate who had written an article not only supporting BDS, but arguing they're not extreme enough. Okay? And I brought this up to some colleagues who wanted to hire this person. I said, look at this BDS article. It's totally anti-Semitic. Oh, no, it's just political. It's just politics. I said, it's not about politics. It's about Jew hatred. And I pointed out, BDS has been deemed anti-Semitic by several countries, various branches, units in several countries, U.S., Germany, Spain, France, others, Jewish organizations, ADL, Simon Wiesenthal Center, and others. As I mentioned last time, the speech, the blood libel and World Jewish Conspiracy speech at UC Riverside by Barghouti. 157 student governments have brought a proposal to adopt BDS to the floor. It has been approved by 50. It was recently approved where I live at UT Dallas. BDS, of course, the president of our university said, look, this has no impact on university policy. That's not the point. It sends a message. It creates an atmosphere. We embrace BDS because the Zionist entity is evil, and anyone associated with it, that is Jews, are evil. Now, there is an intersectionality between the academy and society. I'm going to talk about Black Lives Matter for a minute. It's not the assertion that no one can do, Black Lives Matter, of course. But the organization, and what interests me in particular, is the words of the leadership. What do they say? Where are they coming from? Patrisse Cullors, for example, endorses BDS. She equates, Palestine and South Africa. Palestine is our generation, South Africa, apartheid. Palestine, mind you. If we don't step up boldly and courageously to end the imperialist project called Israel, imperialism, same, Zionism, same thing, right? We're doomed. Note the language of existential struggle here. Here's a case of intersectionality. If it's evil, it's from Israel. You've probably seen this image. This came after, George Floyd. This image, it has Black Lives Matter written on it, but this has actually appeared on the website of Deadly Exchange, created by Jewish Voice for Peace. Do you know this website? Deadly Exchange. All the evil that turns up in American law enforcement comes from Israel. Like this. The guys who murdered George Floyd got it from the Israelis. Statements like this: if white privilege is the source of all evil, then it opens the door to statements like this from Yusra Kogali from BLM Toronto, that whiteness is not humanness. It's similar to the idea that it's not that all Jews are evil, but all evil is Jewish and all Jews are white. And you can read that. I don't need to read it to you. Melina Abdullah, very prominent in Black Lives Matter, the founder of BLM Los Angeles, very tightly associated with Louis Farrakhan. And she says, this is at the intersectionality, our oppressors are the same. The oppressors of women, LGBTQ, Palestinians, African Americans, Hispanics, Native, the oppressors are all the same. And they're all white, and they're all Jews or influenced by Jews. Jews invade our campuses and they're the cause of Islamophobia, racism, and intolerance. If we can just get rid of the Jews, we'll have no Islamophobia, no racism, and no intolerance.
She said the word Jews?
Yeah. It's a tweet. And she's an admirer of Farrakhan. I continue to appreciate the minister's fearless leadership and intense love for our people. And of course, Farrakhan needs no introduction, I'm sure, to this crowd. So you see, Farrakhan is a clergy person, sort of. Notice the shift in the movement here for civil rights, human rights, the struggle of African Americans, legitimate, important, real. But compare this to a different sort of intersection. from the 60s. You won't see a photograph, anything like this now. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Reverend Martin Luther King, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, praying together at the National Cemetery. Abernathy holding Torah scrolls. Can you see Farrakhan holding Torah scrolls and praying with a rabbi? Other places in society, Nihad Awad of the Council of American Islamic Relations. Nihad Awad is a great admirer of Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Al-Qaradawi, who had, Muslim Brotherhood head, who says that the Muslims must have a duty to finish what Hitler started. Of course, CARE receives substantial money from the Muslim Brotherhood. What's he going to say? And he's urging Muslims to, this is an alignment, intersection, to align themselves with Black Lives Matter. We've seen Linda Sarsour several times. She's very, very close to CARE, very much part of CARE's activities. I am Muslim, and I am this Black Lives Matter. You get a red-green intersection. Some of you, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one old enough to actually remember Angela Davis at Berkeley. Who's a vocal advocate for Rasmea Odeh, PFL, Palestine, People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, convicted of terrorism in a 1969 attack, served 10 years and was released in a prisoner exchange. She's a hero. I mentioned Marwan Barghouti. The picture blocked out his name. Marwan Barghouti, I think he is a relative of Omar Barghouti, if I'm not mistaken. It's a big family, the Barghouti clan, right? So we have this, left-wing support for jihadist terrorists, Islamic terrorists. The squad you know about. Ilan Omar, famous for her line about it's all about the Benjamins, from Puff Daddy's hip-hop tune. Rashida Tlaib says, Israel is engaged in a continuous Nakba. We have another one here. Pramila Jayapal recently made, her recent statement, Israel is a racist state. Now, the intersectionality and the anti-Zionism that is driving it in the academy legitimizes not only social movements from the left, but also from the right. If the intellectuals are thinking this way, what's the problem? And this goes back, to Sayyid Qutb, the chief ideologue of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hassan al-Banna was the founder, but Qutb is really the one that influences the whole Islamic world, including Ruhollah Khomeini, who is a Qutbist. Khomeini translated Sayyid Qutb into Farsi, was trained by and got his indoctrination from the Muslim Brothers. Every Muslim has a duty to do battle against Israel, and doesn't every moral person have this same duty, according to what we hear on the campuses? Ahmed Yassin, founder of Hamas, killing Jews is an act of devotion. And then in the name of what? Would the anti-Zionists say, no, Ahmed, you're wrong. It's not an act of devotion, it's a necessary moral action, but not devotion. You see the problem. Osama bin Laden, it's hatred of the Jews is part of our religion, and there is something religious about anti-Zionism. It has it's a separate lecture, but I think anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism resemble a religion more than an ideology, if we can make that distinction. And again, I refer you to David Bernstein's book about wokeism. John McWhorter's book, Woke Racism, has religious trappings. Here we have some infamous anti-Zionists among the white supremacists. Richard Butler. In the interest of time, I'm going a little more quickly. Chris Barker from the KKK. The KKK has, various groups, subgroups. Thomas Robb. These internet sites and organizations, not just on the internet, but tied to the internet. The Stormfront, notorious anti-Zionist, non-black, former KKK. Andrew Anglin. Now, let me just quickly wrap this up. There is a certain historical intersection I want to bring up. It's with the Nazis. The Nazis began with anti-Zionism. 1921, Alfred Rosenberg, chief ideologue, wrote a book on Zionism, Enemy of the State. In Mein Kampf, Hitler says that he knew the essence of the Jew from the Zionists he met in Vienna before the First World War. The book burnings were organized largely by students in Nazi Germany, not exclusively, but largely by students. We have this volume called Hitler's Professors, published in 1946 by Max Weinreich. Hitler's Professors. Heidegger. The Fuhrer himself and he alone is the present and future German reality on its law. And Heidegger was not an idiot. When I was in graduate school, in a galaxy far, far away and long, long ago, you know how graduate students are. They like to, we like to drop names to appear intelligent and to appear to understand things we know nothing about. So Heidegger was one of the names you got to drop. And I was, of course, seduced by Heidegger, enamored of him, and I was just crushed when I found out he was a Nazi. And I started thinking, is there anything in his philosophy that would be inconsistent with being a Nazi? And actually, no. It's perfectly consistent. The head of the Nazi University lecturers, Walter Schulze, invokes what the great thinkers of German idealism dreamed of. It comes to reality. Just the fact that there was a doctor's trial. Really? Medicine? A judge's trial? Perhaps there should have been a professor's trial. So I started with a movie. Let me end with a movie, Judgment at Nuremberg, based on the judge's trial. Again, perhaps some of you are old enough to actually remember this movie or know or have heard of it. It's based on the judge's trial, and there's a scene in the film where the defense attorney for the accused judges, one of whom is Ernst Janning, is badgering a young German woman over her relationships with a Jewish man who had been arrested by the Nazis for inappropriate advances to her. She was trying to say he didn't do anything. The defense attorney is badgering her until finally Janning stands up and shouts at his attorney, "Are we going to do this again?" So let me end by asking my dear friends, colleagues, fellow students, are we going to do this again? Are we? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Your work is very important on these issues, but I'm going to push back a little bit.
Please.
Okay. So, ISGAP is committed to mapping and decoding issues of anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of discrimination. And I think those of us who are studying, Seema is saying it's very important to build coalitions. And many of us in the Jewish community and scholars of anti-Semitism feel, even under siege, that our community, our issues are not being understood, taken seriously. There's not really a space for us on the academic landscape to deal with our work. It's a struggle to get onto the landscape. And by the way, I debated Stokely Carmichael in Montreal, Concordia University.
Of course you did.
Yeah, one of the great orators, amazing. I was certainly outclassed, but viciously anti-Semitic. I agree with that. So I think we're very concerned about how anti-Semitism is being dismissed. As you say, we're dismissed as being white supremacist and Zionism is whiteness, etc. And at the same time, I think it's very important to, first of all, I think to define what the Black Lives Matter, what is Black Lives Matter? So there's an organization that's led by several people that have been anti-Semitic and problematic, and yet I would argue Black Lives Matter, the vast part of Black Lives Matter was this sort of organic movement across the African American community, but the wider American society expressing outrage of police brutality and systemic racism in the United States, that it was just an outpouring, a swelling that it's sort of enough is enough. So what is Black Lives Matter at one level? And I think it's very important that there's, you show the connection to the Nation of Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood and people in the Muslim Brotherhood that are hijacking issues of structural racism in the United States and using it to their own advantage. And I think we have to be very clear about issues of anti-Semitism and the legacy and the perpetuation of racism in the United States and beyond, and not to underestimate it. And I think at the same time, we also have to point out that there are representatives or elements in our community that is tone deaf to issues of racism. What happens when some leaders in the Jewish community are quick to celebrate the end of affirmative action? What does that do when the Jewish community wants to be part of a conversation on issues of racism and anti-Semitism, and we want to be part of the critical race theory or the intellectual conversation, when perhaps we're being tone deaf to and underestimating what the African American community or communities want? So I don't know, there has to be a conversation that people who are fighting racism listen to those of us fighting anti-Semitism, and those of us fighting anti-Semitism listen to the struggles of the African American community and issues of racism, and not to when we dismiss the notion of power in society, that we shouldn't look at racism and power. What does that do to the conversation? Are people going to engage or turn off? So
I don't dispute any of that.
I know. So, but I think, and it's painful. And I was saying at the beginning of this conversation that some people are listening and hearing anti-Semitism for the first time, really, and it's difficult. But at the same time, we also have to have a conversation about racism and how do we build a coalition, and I think to build a coalition, we have to really understand what's going on in society and how certain things are being perpetuated. And if African Americans and Jews are being played against each other, who benefits from it? And
that's a good question.
And so it's complicated. So I don't know. These are just issues that I wanted to kind of throw out. And
I don't dispute, like I said, any of that. And in addition to that, I would say words matter. And if we're going to build coalitions, we have to go to the trouble of listening to each other
Right, but
and,
just to,
and
so-
acknowledging our own issues, so to say.
yeah. And look, the statements that the people that you raised in dealing with intersectionality, it's horrific. But,
It's very hard to hear you.
Yeah, it's a little hard.
sorry. So, no, the comments that you raised from some of the thinkers, it's horrible, but does that represent the terrain that we're engaged in?
Not necessarily, but the words that come from the leadership have an impact on everyone. So whether it's Jewish Voice for Peace,
So,
or,
yeah, so,
you
but
know.
my point is, it's horrific, and yet there is this sort of socioeconomic and political reality that we have to deal with, which is also, yeah. Naomi,
So I really appreciated this conversation, and especially I appreciated what she said, Charles. But one of the things, right, that Seema talked about was sort of how to be, right, how to take the offense rather than to be reactive. And one of the things that I keep thinking about, when I'm in the classroom with my students, when they bring up the suffering of the Palestinians, let's say, because we're not talking, like I can go in as a professor, I can give a whole analysis of this, but when I'm in deep conversation with a student who's expressing this solidarity, right, with these suffering people, it takes a long, it's not helpful to say, well, actually the number of Palestinian children killed is exaggerated, or various other things. What do you see as sort of I don't want to use the word offensive, but the sort of proactive, response to being able to have a constructive conversation with many of my students are really ignorant about all of this, but they've heard that they're suffering, and they've heard this analogy with Zionism and apartheid. How do I counteract that in 30 seconds?
I don't think you can counteract it in 30 seconds. It has to be counteracted patiently, listening. I think it's a mistake to say, "Oh, you're completely wrong." It's the Palestinian suffering is caused by their own leadership, and just leave it at that. When I taught, I used to teach. I still once in a while teach Holocaust. And when I was at the University of Memphis, 35+% of my students would be African American, and they're trying to make sense of it it's just like slavery. And I would say, well, let's see. Let's study. Let's examine the history. Let's see. And I wouldn't say slavery was horrible, but it's not the same. It's not the same. If you only have 30 seconds, I guess you can acknowledge the legitimacy as a human being to be wounded by the suffering of another human being. I mean, that's good. That's real. I don't want to quash that. I don't want to crush that. We're supposed to be troubled, aren't we? We're supposed to be troubled by the suffering of the Palestinians. We're supposed to be, if we're human. Part of being reminded of our humanity lies in raising the cry of "Here I am, Hineni," but it has to go beyond emotional response. There has to be thought, understanding, learning involved in the response also. Raising further questions and not shutting it down with answers. Further questions. Where's the suffering come from? Who's inflicting it? What's the context? What brought it on? And just more questions, questioning, and avoiding fixed formulas and ready answers. At the same time, I'm a big proponent of naming the evil. when there was a hostage situation at a synagogue in Texas, at Colleyville, and I lived nearby. All the Jewish organizations are writing letters of outcry, outrage, but nobody would say who the guy was, what his name was, what he was doing there. Nobody would name him. And of course, I know all the JCC, Federation, Holocaust Museum, my own Ackerman Center. I know all of these people. None of them would name the perpetrator. And when I called them out on it, they got very upset with me.
Professor Dr. Long.
Oh,
Thank you.
good morning, everybody. Thank you, David. I always enjoy your talks, and they spark thought and analysis. I mean, first of all, I feel older because Angela Davis and the First Castle were part of my childhood. A couple of things. With regard to Kimberly Crenshaw, we're not friends, but we worked together in our early days at Columbia. We actually were working actively together, along with one of her close colleagues now, Ruth Charles Harris.
She took your ideas. She took your ideas.
No, we did that to try to block, and we were almost successful. We actually went to DC on this altogether to block the appointment of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, who were part of the, I believe, Anita contingent, right, that went as academics to Capitol Hill, lobbying senators the day of the vote, right? So we go way back, not as friends, but as persons who have worked together. And there's a name that's not mentioned as much as it should be in the world of critical race theory, and that's really the grandpa. I mean, Kimberly Crenshaw was really kind of an early disciple, right? But the real father or parent of critical race theory is Derek Bell.
Yeah, that's true.
Who was a wonderful scholar, and someone I presented with again when I was a baby years ago. And I remember, rest his soul, may his name be for a memory, his memory be for a blessing, Derek Bell. I remember at our conference, at the National Conference on Race and Equality in the late 90s, he said something I'll never forget. He was our keynote speaker. I was presenting that day. He was the keynote speaker. And he was talking about his book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, the permanence of American racism. So I want to kind of breathe life into what Derek Bell said, because I think his voice, though silenced now, should be echoed. And one of the things he said fervently at that conference was, look, people think I'm a pessimist. They keep saying I'm a pessimist because my book is Face at the Bottom of the Well, and then the tagline is the permanence of racism. He said, they tell me I'm a pessimist. He said, I'm not a pessimist. He said, I am just, a tortured realist. He said, I don't see racism ending in our lifetime because it gets reproduced, as so many other kinds of hatreds get reproduced. He said, I'm just calling it as I see it. And he said, if we acknowledge that reality, this is a phrase he used, I shall never forget. He said, we find that there's oxygen in the margins. Those of us who are forced to live in the margins then say, okay, this is the way it is. It was the way it'll probably be the day after I die, but what can I do now to make my life meaningful? How can I find oxygen in the margins? He said, that's why. So what I would push back a bit in terms of how you frame critical race theory and intersectionality, in part because of my first-hand knowledge of some of the founders. And one of the things I would say is that critical race theory is not prescriptive. That's what Derek Bell, I think, would argue, that it is descriptive. So when they talk about race as, not being the thing that Gobineau said it was, right? that it doesn't have fixity. It's not biological, and certainly races are not unequal. Are not, unequal, right? That there's no fixity with that. So when the critical race theorists, I am here to defend them, I would argue that when they talk about race as being central, they're not saying race should be central. They're saying this is a crap we inherited, man. And so how are we gonna deal with this? And I'm not gonna change it. The day after I die, people will still be looking at race this way. So knowing that, what the hell do we do? And then my gender or sex is similarly constructed, and I'm going to be beaten up by that, by some people, and I'll be celebrated by others. But that is just a reality in this world I inherited. And that is the same with all the other kinds of isms that get visited upon the concept of intersectionality. So I would just argue, I think for them, that it is not prescriptive, but it's descriptive. And they're saying, don't get at me, don't get mad at me, because I'm just reading the world the way it reads to me.
Derek Bell, by the way, is included in the collection of the key writings.
Okay, great. Yes, absolutely.
He is one of the key
Oh yeah, I knew that.
thinkers.
I wasn't saying it for you. I knew
Yeah.
that you knew that.
Just a couple things. It is misleading to suggest that everyone among the critical race theorists are on the same page. I mean, they have variety among themselves. As for its being prescriptive, or descriptive, once I see the description, then I'm led to ask, okay, so now what do I do? Right? What's next? That's all. But thank you, Carlton. Thank you.
All right, so Elshaday's blowing up my phone. We're over time, unfortunately. So we'll take a break, and David, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you.